This is Stowe Bishop with the Republicans for National Renewal, and proud to be joined by Andrew McCarthy, I think the most firebrand candidate running for Congress in New York. First and foremost, how has it been campaigning in New York and with all the issues with gerrymandering and things like that? You guys are truly enemies of the state up there with the regime that we have. How's that experience been like so far?
Well, great to be here. Thank you for having me, first off. It's been quite an experience up there. You're probably right, I'm the most fire-breathing in New York. I don't know about generally, we have pretty good competition for that, but in New York it's filled with rhinos, so we have two problems. You alluded to the left. The maps are controlled from Albany, so they're definitely out of our hands. But, you know, being the candidate on the furthest right of center in New York provides me a lot of targets. So you have to work your way to the Democrats, but you got to get through some rhinos first. That's what the process has been thus far. When we were in an exploratory phase, we were taking on guys like John Katko, Tom Reed, Chris Jacobs, regional guys before we had districts formulated. And now that they went through the whole process, we're one of the 3 districts that actually, we have a Let's Go Brandon chair in the back. Anyways, sorry to focus with that, I want to join in. Anyways, long story short, we were one of 3 districts that really lucked out. We're in an R+24, which provides a generational opportunity. The person that wins it holds it, and it's winning the primary. You don't have to focus as much on the general, thankfully. So we think our message is the perfect fit for that, and an R+24 nationally, but we also focus on regional issues that are imperative and that got me off the bench to run. I've never done this before. I've never held elected office, so the way I jumped into the race, ready to go in a D+6 district, ready to go in an R+4, whatever. It's now shaped to the point where our brand is fitting the district. So I feel really good that we haven't had to change our brand.
That's great. How's it been with some of the dynamics within New York Republican politics in general? Obviously, we've got a new wave. And it's interesting the same way this dynamic with the populist wing is changing. I mean, even in Florida, we still have this tension, even with Ron DeSantis. How has that been dealing as a new brand Republican in this mold? How's it been dealing with some of the old guard within Republican New York politics?
The old guard. So it's not just on the left. It's not maps handed to you from Albany by Democrats. It's also dealing with the institutions that Republicans have there. It's old machine politics. And the good thing about running in 2022 is that you can beam the message, beam the signal through the noise, right? So instead of having to play by machine politics and schmooze all these state assemblymen, state assemblywomen, current sitting members are tough. They're self-preservation oriented, so they want to protect Chris Jacobs, right? His seat. They understand everything that I just laid out. It's a generational seat. They want to keep their brand of republicanism in Congress, and I think we're a little to the right of that. We want to bring more of a populist element in. That's America first. I mean, that's really what the constituents want. So when we go to these town halls, when we go to bars, churches, we have these conversations. Ours resonates a little bit more heartfelt, and you can see when you throw something out there and someone reacts to it, as opposed to a canned speech from your traditional, sitting Republican that is going to hit their talking points or bullet points and get out of town. I'll give you a great example of that, and I'll stop rambling. But I love talking about the district. I love talking about the dynamics up there. Did a speech, and it's a competitive dynamic where you have 4 candidates, right? You have the 2 other primary candidates, me and Chris Jacobs. I speak, 2 others spoke, he spoke, I saw him on the way out, and you could see that he went up there, went through the motions and left. Well, I stole that county, and we got an endorsement, one of our first endorsements, yeah. So we have, and it's a pivotal county, so it splits the county down the middle to where his old district was and what's new as far as opportunities concerned. We picked one up, and it just shows them that our message resonates. You can't go through the motions and expect to do this as an empty suit. You have to actually bring substantial, substance-based policy, and it has to be America first.
I think that sincerity is kind of a key part of populist politics in America right now. People are tired of the Chamber of Commerce type Republicans that are used to going into the same sort of circles time and time again. They've got their playbook. But really, the realignment we're seeing in politics is precisely this working class recognizing that they have no one fighting for their interests in D.C. And someone like you seems prepared to actually go up there and rattle the cages.
And when you rattle the cages, it throws D.C. in a frenzy because Chamber of Commerce isn't used to dealing with small dollar donors, It's great. Even when we have visits like this, we're meeting with donors that say, oh, love what you're doing. I'm from Nebraska, I'm from Florida, I'm from California. That part of New York, it's funny because if they pay attention to politics, they always knew that was a rough part of New York in terms of, all we get out of there is rhinos, they're lukewarm, let's stop paying attention in New York, they're off the radar. But if you come and this is an organic message, it's an authentic message, you deliver for the people. I've never done this before, so again, like I do have a little bit more leeway, a little bit more, area to work with that they do. I understand that they're in a box, but it's an optional box you have to be in. Chamber of Commerce, and associate organizations design that. When you put your name on so much policy, you painted yourself into a corner. When you've taken so much money, it hasn't been on behalf of your district or the citizenry there or any of our needs. You're doing this for globalist interests. Chamber of Commerce is an American institution by name only at this point. It's shelled out the entire Midwest. It was one of the biggest proponents in NAFTA. They defended NAFTA for decades after its origin, and to the detriment of millions, tens of millions of people throughout the Midwest, Central New York, Upstate New York, Western New York. We've lost hundreds of thousands of jobs since NAFTA has been signed, just in our region alone. So.
Well, that's one of the dynamics is that, what's caused so much of American business to flee to China, it's not necessarily because it's cheaper to build stuff in China these days.
It's actually, and that's sort of an excuse, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, they're actually trying to, they're making the calculation that access to the Chinese market is going to be more valuable in the long run to ours. And their priorities is very dangerous the way that their calculations are being made right now.
I'm glad that you picked this up so we could talk, we picked this up in the middle when we were talking about NAFTA, trade, traditional manufacturing, even higher-end manufacturing that's going overseas. But let's sort of sandwich it with where you're going. We're talking about capital flows, we're talking about a marketplace, so where we then sell our product. So it's made in China, it has our brand and our image, and it's just sold to their market. Is it American by any definition? But let's go back to the beginning. So who financed the factories throughout China? Your retirement capital, private equity in the United States, government pensions, state pensions. All of these investments were to build up the middle class of China as our jobs were flowing out. So I think too often we talk about just the deindustrialization of the Middle West, right? We don't, and of the Rust Belt as they call it. But we don't talk about who paid for that. So Wall Street mechanized it, the U.S. invested in it, and now we're on the other side of that, where we're trying to get jobs back, and you hit the nail on the head. If we now reinvest and double down and say that they have a middle class that's 380 million people, which is the size of the United States. Their middle class alone is the size of the United States. Well, they're looking at that as the market. So you've cut out the capital, you've cut out the manufacturing, and you've cut out the market. What's left of the American economy to participate in the global marketplace or in China?
Right.
I don't know. Maybe intellectual property or Hollywood, sports maybe. Not much left for everyday people.
Well, the problem is now the NBA is more obsessed with the Chinese marketplace.
They have no other option.
Base, yeah.
I just made the analogy about politicians painting themselves into a corner. They have no option. Yeah. China's got the NBA by the you-know-what, and it's because they want developing nations marketplace. It's not just China. China imprints its brand throughout the world. And I'm not just saying they do this with the NBA. So everywhere that China goes, they put their brand out there. I think the NBA knows that Southeast Asia and the amount of capital that's there, it's like the biggest marketplace in the world, frankly. It's taking over the West in terms of capital formation and investment. So if you look at the development that's going on in Southeast Asia, when you look at what's going on in China, I think the NBA knows that that's the next step, but it doesn't have to. They think that's around the corner, and it's sad that it's got that way, but what Trump say? You go woke, you go broke. Right. It's if we stop going to these games, if we stop paying attention, that's all we can do as individuals. We can bring legislation about investment flows in China. So if you elect the right officials, we can have this conversation on the House floor. Right. I don't know how many people know that the process happens is the problem. So I think people scratch their heads and say, that's weird that LeBron James has to defend the president of China. Right. It's very weird. But I don't think most Americans are focused on what goes into that. Right. And we sort of just like really distilled it, and that's not all it is, but that's most of what it is.
And these are policies that we've enacted that have given them these advantages. It is not a coincidence.
No, none of it's organic.
It is managed decline.
Yeah.
Kind of building off of that, though, one of the things that I love about your campaign is not only do you have great rhetoric, the substance behind it And obviously with your background with military intelligence analysis, the Air Force veteran, what it means to be America first is very different today than it was 5 days ago with everything going on in Ukraine. I know you've spoken out about the need to keep American troops out of any sort of escalation over there. Can you talk a little bit about where you're seeing that with the world it is right now? Because it's interesting, there's a report that came out a few hours ago about how America was shocked that China was sharing intel it got from DC with Putin. It's like, who could have seen that coming,
China and Russia have a far deeper relationship than we'd like to admit. It makes us uncomfortable, right? I understand. Everyone's got kids' gloves nowadays. It's the lack of realism in foreign policy that's gotten us here. We need to identify that is what we gave China the opportunity to look at intelligence, the report said. They rebuffed it, sold it back to, I'm just saying they dished it over to the Russians, and then we're shocked. You couple that with, from the state, and that's DOD, that's IC, couple that with the State Department that says, we think sanctions are the answer. We're going to take, they're lining up 120,000 individuals on your border. Sanctions are not the answer. This isn't realist foreign policy. We want to villainize Vladimir Putin rather than assessing him and analyzing him to deal with him.
Right.
Vladimir Putin's no saint. That's the other thing. MSNBC did a hit piece on me the other day. The pro-Putin Republicans. I swore an oath to the Constitution. I don't give a what about President Putin.
Right.
He's a bad guy, but here's the thing. They force you to have this conversation politically. Either you're a pro-Trump, you got to be anti-Russia, I think both of those governments, the government that was just invaded and the government that did the invading, are the most corrupt governments within 1,000 miles. I mean, Ukraine's the most corrupt government in Europe, and we can't have the conversation about it because then you're pro-Putin.
Right.
Then I'm Putin stooge, right? It's really bizarre. It's a bifurcated. It's a way of bifurcating national security that I never thought we'd get here, but here we are, and it's extremely dangerous for national security decision making. So that's my take on it.
Well, it just further shows the decay of the expert class, right? We've seen it play out with Fauciism, right?
I'm sorry, I just got to laugh because the expert class, right? The teacher told me so. The mommy told me I was good at this class, and now they've been doing a thing on Twitter lately. The West Wing class. They dig up old Jen Psaki tweets. These are just people that saw the bureaucracy on TV. They gravitate to the left. They want to be House of Cards. They want to be Mr. or Mrs. DC. You're dealing with an entire nation at stake, right? National security implications that go so far above their head that we just sort of laid it out. They tried to fight a war with sanctions, or they tried to prevent a war with sanctions. It frightens me to think if the shoe was on the other foot and we were in a peer-to-peer state and it was China or Russia actually confronting us. Sanctions? Or what's in the toolkit?
Right.
What is in the Biden administration in terms of the toolkit, and you're using a hammer or something hyper-specific like tweezers to go up against, to excavate a ditch. It's not going to work. It's not the right tool. So I think they need a basic understanding of, international relations 101. And maybe I'll take that back. I think it's too much of a dependency on academia, right? It's not realism.
Right.
The idealism that's taken over academia in terms of international relations, national security, has painted us into a corner. I'll use the cliche all day long because that's sort of where we are as a microcosm of the United States. It's going to break us long term if we don't get realistic about the problems, and that's why it can't be neocon realism. It has to be America first stuff.
Right.
When we talk about reshoring, when we talk about tariffs, when we talk about retrenchment from these 20-year wars, these are America first realist foreign policies that would even break a lot of rhinos' hearts, right? Because they're invested in those things, fiscally and otherwise. I guess the bottom line is if we don't take a hard look in the mirror soon, and we know that the left is gone, then we're going to lose the middle and we're going to lose Republicans. So it's getting them out of office, but it's having the counterpoint in, I guess, more of a robust argument when we can get the floor and when we do have the conversation about things like national security, because I don't think they have the policy chops to talk about it.
Right. We may not know what sort of tools that they would use against us, but we know that the first thing and foremost would shut off energy to Europe. Things like that. I'm getting serious about these sort of strategic pivot points that, the non-liberal countries seem to recognize that, energy still matters, and being able to heat your homes and the limits of your dreams about solar panels and wind turbines and things like that.
Isn't it weird how that works?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have the number one. Well, let's look at three near peer competitors. Okay. We'll even throw in India. We'll be nice to India today. India and China burn more coal, either one of them, not together, than the entire West does, than Europe does, North America. Russia doesn't care about these. They go to the UN, they say they'll be in green deals, whatever. They don't care about it. They're pragmatists. Vladimir Putin's not a genius. He gets a little too much credit on the KGB side of things, but I think he's a pragmatist. So he says, well, why would I'm not going to stop pumping fuel. What do you mean? They've taken all the nuclear power plants out of France, or 80% of them out of France. Yeah, get them energy dependent. He also does a brilliant job. When Baku said the Caspian region started to pump into Europe, he says, I'm going to put some pressure on you guys. I got to get 20% of those contracts. So anything that comes out of the Caspian, he's now got, it's like the tentacles, right? But he understands the realist nature of energy. You can't go green overnight. Look, I'm a fan of clean water, blue skies, right? Absolutely. Green trees. If you're not, you'd be weird. Left, right, or center, that's apolitical. We love that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's the autocrats, or maybe just the pragmatists, that have a realistic view of how green things can get and at what rate.
Yeah, the true allies of Putin in Europe are not the far-right parties, it's the green parties that have at this point. But again, speaking of just the faults of this expert class, what role do you see accountability playing in terms of what America First Caucus can do within DC? Because there's going to be limits and limitation, particularly with the 60 vote threshold from the Senate. What role do you see being played in? I know Matt Gaetz has talked a lot about the way that every committee should be an investigation hearing.
I love that.
Do you see that sort of aspect that Republicans can bring to the table when we take back over?
Matt Gaetz had a brilliant idea, and this came up maybe a couple months back in an interview very similar to this. He just said, one of the initiatives has to be, and this you'd think that this would be intrinsic to Congress, right? That not just Intelligence Committee, not just certain handpicked committees or oversight committees. Your job is to literally rein in the executive, have oversight. By definition and by functionality, you should be an oversight committee. So props to Representative Gaetz for pushing that. In terms of accountability, I think we need to start with the last two. We have a lot to work on, but we need to start with the last 2 years and Fauci and the CDC. Take a hard look at any of the organizations that were involved in some of the intelligence collecting on what was going on in the Wuhan lab. I read that entire report. It was from, I think, almost every single intelligence. It was like 12 different intelligence agencies, maybe even more, because I'm sure they looked at fiscal flows and investment on that. Look, I'm going into the rabbit hole to say this. We got a lot to work with just COVID-related alone before we even get into other areas of accountability, but we're speaking to the administrative state, right? Congress has done a really shitty job of reining in the administrative state. It's a leviathan that is not easy. It's a tall task for anybody, right? Gaetz is right. When you mobilize and mechanize these committees to have pinpoint accuracy on the types of oversight that they do, that's one thing. But we should decentralize and look at the possibilities for the administrative state entirely differently. So DC, the swamp, is a complex system that's hard for the average American to understand. But so much of the problems come from these three-letter agencies. They could be, Department of the Interior, right? They do great things, but why do they have to be in DC? Right? So if we decentralize them, if we break up just the geography of it, just being, so close to each other. We talked about intelligence sharing earlier. You don't think that the IC is doing some of that stuff off the cuff, or that the IRS is doing that off the cuff with other agencies? So sometimes it's just being too close to each other. It's detrimental to the nation at large. So I would say break them up, decentralize them. It brings jobs to other regions. I think we talked about the West Wing class that's in power now, sort of fantasizing and romanticizing about going to DC. Right. There'd no longer be that.
Right.
So we'd have people that actually were from where they were working in the federal government. That's wild, right? Or maybe a decentralized FBI instead of having just one FBI. And there's hundreds of FBI offices, but maybe just quadrants, right? It's healthier. If you like community policing, why not start with regional policing? And just go on and apply this to almost every single aspect of the executive branch, and you got a head start of.
Tell the women the party is tonight.
The party tonight? That guy will take care. He'll get you. I love that they asked me that too.
Yeah.
We're doing policy questions, party questions. Let's go, Brandon chants.
Got it
Anyways,
all. That's what CPAC's good for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the biggest issues right now that I think is the biggest killer of Democrats right now, and while we're seeing, we're going to see things that I don't think people thought were possible in the modern political environment, is obviously inflation and the damage being done to working class Americans. Where do you think Republicans should be putting our focus on in terms of really dealing with those kitchen table issues that can really make an impact to all these workers that might be voting Republican for the first time?
Well, maybe the silver lining about Ukraine is that it brought to the kitchen table an element, not all of inflation, but an element within inflation, and that's the flow of natural resources, right? So we saw gas just skyrocket to, I don't even know what the price is right now, but it's a global, some would use the word cartel, but it's a global controlled marketplace. There's no reason why we can't be pumping again. And I think when you have stuff like the pipeline situation with Biden axing that day one, cutting all those jobs, crushing us on gas prices, they go by the wayside because we can talk about it, and we can talk about how you need gas to pay for anything, so it has a price point attached to it, and that's how your infrastructure, that's how your supply chain works. But getting back to it, I saw this transition since Ukraine happened. Energy independence is the bottom line. Energy independence is where we need to be as a party. I think it sells left, right, and center. It's also just common sense. Right. If we remember, under President Trump, we were a supplier.
Right.
We were not a consumer, a net consumer. We were supplying to the world. Liquid LNG is really huge too. Texas, Pennsylvania, Alaska, they've all been crushed. And frankly, I'm a clean coal guy. West Virginia's been crushed. I think it's also to have it's good to have a resilient fossil fuel network and everything, but a resilient energy dependence. So bringing into the fold nuclear is really big, and not going green as fast as we mentioned. The aspiration of doing that, the process of doing that, sometimes negates real growth in other sectors of the economy. So I know we went super complex with that, but at the end of the day, bringing to the kitchen table energy independence. It's a very, very apolitical concept.
And with so much talent coming into the Republican Party right now, what do you look at for your own? Obviously, the key of politics is coalition building and being able to make friends in a variety of different coalitions. What in particular, though, does America First mean to you? And what are you looking for in terms of potential allies running for Congress to try to build a caucus that can really shape and force the Republican Party to really go down that Trump line rather than retracting to some of the errors of the past?
It's so funny because when you talk about and this isn't exactly what you asked, when you talk about what being a conservative means to me, I would say it's about defending universal truths against tyranny, against the government, against this third state that cuts off the relationship between you and God, or you and your family, or you and your private property, right? This is like the shtick Republican thing that we've always heard, but it's true, right? It's good to be a conservative. It's good to embrace that. However, it's not realistic right now. Right. And populism brings into the fold, America First brings into the fold the people that can manipulate those beautiful relationships that I just described, right? We should only really have to care about our private property, our relationships with our family, and our relationships within the church, maintaining the institution of church. If it was that easy, we'd all just be conservatives, it'd be Ronald Reagan, game over, right? But it's not. We have to remember that everyone knows that information, that this is a complex system, that the left is really in control right now on a lot of levels. Media, Hollywood, the entertainment business, academia, government, local government. New York, it's really big for us. So taking the next step to be an America First candidate means taking a look at Donald Trump's resume and realizing that that worked. All of that worked. There's a reason why all those tariffs are still on the books. Right. There's a reason why Putin's in now within a year, right? There's a reason why all the dominoes start falling immediately, because we had the castle. Right. It was perfect, right? So, like a lot of boomers do with Reagan, when they hold on to him and they say, no, we have to be conservative. Well, it's almost like, and we're going to get a part two of Trump, which is going to be great, and hopefully we just, then DeSantis, then we get this whole, then we twist the arm of the public, and I mean that in a results-based way, to say, look, man, we should focus on our country and our sovereignty before other areas, because unfortunately, some free market aspects of just being a traditional conservative aren't entirely beneficial. It's not our fault, right? On paper, they're perfect. Hayek is perfect. Keynes is wrong, right? But that's not how the world works. So we need to intervene and make sure that just as important as to have a free market, we need to have a fair market. We don't have to add more government. We don't have to input more to the government coffers to do so. We can use the tools at hand to make sure that we maintain stability here, because the three institutions that I mentioned come before everything, and we're going to lose them.
Well, that's one of the problems, though, is that one of the failures of conservatism the last 100 years is that it's been so focused on winning elections and the political side of things that the right has lost big business. The right has lost many of the churches. The right has lost many of these institutions that are not within the government. How do you think that conservatives can be trying to utilize the levers that we do have, which seems to be increasingly political politics and this populist wave? How can we use that to either build new institutions or kind of compete where the left has had so much success and in some of these non-political ways that end up having so much additional impact on our life?
I got to be honest, I hate to give you the same answer twice, but some of those institutions are overrated. And if we focus on the church, if we focus on the family, and we focus on, because this is next on their list from the left, they're coming after private property next. So if you focus on those three, some of the residual effects, the peripheral effects, they'll take care of themselves. If we're not going to win the fight in Hollywood, we probably won't win the fight in academia. But if you focus on those three, you get moms now protesting school boards saying, "You're affecting my church. You're affecting my kids." You see what I'm saying? You mechanize just through those three as a lens, because you'll win fights and you'll pick safer fights just by focusing through those. The Republican Party has picked so many fights that we can't win, like healthcare, throughout the years. That if we just look at those three, we get to be a little bit more scrupulous, and we say, oh, that's specific. It's not always that easy, right? Moms got pissed about CRT, about masks on their kids, about LGBTQ stuff, about revisionist history. But the silver lining is that we get to pick the fight. It's on our terms. You win elections. You win entire states like Virginia on that. New York, you're going to see a massive red wave. I'm going to be part of that, and it's because we just focused on those three. Don't fall to the left's +1 fallacy that you have to keep adding on and tinkering with institutions to maintain them. Those three, the rest takes care of itself.
Well, Andrew, thank you for stopping by the RNR booth here at CPAC. What's the website that people can go to donate to your campaign?
Oh, good question. I think it's McCarthy. I think it's Andrew McCarthy, NY.com. Put in the show notes, man.
There you go. We'll add down there. Excellent.
Awesome. Thanks, brother.
Andrew.